The rain had started before dinner, drumming on Boise's rooftops like a warning no one heard. I, Ria Donnelly, 17, stood by the window watching my reflection blur in the glass. Mom's laughter filled the kitchen. Curtis shouted at the TV. Shane scrolled his phone. And Juno Vale, my adopted sister, sat across the table twisting her fingers, her plate untouched. I thought she was sick. I was wrong. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked like glass. One sentence sharp, unreal, split my life in two. She said I was the reason she was pregnant. For a moment, air vanished. My body froze before my mind caught up. I waited for someone to laugh, to tell her to stop. But silence grew heavy, like concrete poured over the room. Curtis's chair scraped first. His eyes were fire, and in that fire I saw everything end. Mom's hand covered her mouth. Shane whispered my name, disbelief tangled with disgust. I felt my heart tearing, waiting for anyone to ask if it was true. No one did. Curtis' voice came next low, shaking, final, get out. I heard the rain hammer harder outside, drowning the sound of my own pulse. My breath came shallow as if the walls had stolen the air. Then 3 knocks on the door, heavy, deliberate. The kind that made even the guilty go quiet. Someone murmured, "Police." And that was the moment I knew my family would never know me again. By dawn, Boise's streets shimmered like silver veins under the streetlights. The storm had passed, but inside me the rain never stopped. They said I could leave once the paperwork was done. Questions, statements, signatures that felt heavier than chains. The officer's eyes were kind, but even kindness hurt when no one else believed you. I walked home because I didn't know where else to go. My shoes squelched with every step, mud clinging to the soles like guilt that wouldn't wash off. When I reached our house, the porch light was on, the door cracked open. My things were already outside: duffel bag, school books, even my sketch pad soaked through. The air smelled like wet cedar and endings. Curtis stood in the doorway, his face empty of anger now, replaced by something worse: disgust. He didn't shout this time. He didn't need to. His silence said everything. Behind him, I saw Mom clutching Juno like a lifeline, her eyes refusing to meet mine. Shane leaned against the wall, shaking his head slowly as if I were a stranger who had wandered into their house by mistake. I wanted to beg, but my throat had dried into sand. Words would have been useless, so I turned away. I drove until the city lights disappeared, parking behind an unfinished building where cranes stood like skeletons against the dawn. I tried to sleep, but the seatbelt buckle dug into my ribs, keeping me half awake. Every noise, the hum of the highway, the drip of rain from the metal frame sounded like judgment. I thought about Luca, my boyfriend. Maybe he would believe me. Maybe he'd say something to make this nightmare stop feeling real. I called him. The line rang once, twice, then his voice came, soft and trembling. He said he believed me, but his parents didn't. They told him to stay away. "It's too messy," he whispered, before hanging up. That silence after the call felt louder than any scream. By the 3rd day, I'd eaten nothing but vending machine crackers and gas station coffee. The bruises on my arms were fading, but the shame had just begun to bloom quiet, permanent. I parked behind a construction site near the edge of town and watched the morning workers arrive. They laughed, passed around coffee, tossed jokes into the air like nothing in the world could break them. I envied that ease. Time moved differently when no one was waiting for you. Hours stretched, nights folded into themselves. My reflection in the rearview mirror became a stranger, eyes swollen, mouth drawn tight. I wondered how long it would take before even I stopped believing my own story. By the 5th morning, the gas gauge blinked red. I had $23 left and no plan. My phone battery was almost gone. I sat there, watching drops crawl down the windshield like tiny decisions. For a moment I considered driving back, knocking on the door, demanding to be heard. But what would I say to faces that had already erased me? When I stepped out of the car, the air was sharp with early autumn. Across the street, a small cafe sat tucked between a laundromat and a flower shop. The window was fogged, a single sign taped crookedly in the corner. "Room for rent. Ask for Nana Pearl." The words blurred as if the glass itself was tired of holding them. Still, something in my chest stirred a faint, foolish hope that maybe not every door in the world was closed. I tightened my jacket and started walking toward the cafe. The smell of roasted beans and sugar pulled me toward the cafe before I realized I'd crossed the street. Through the fogged window, I saw a woman wiping the counter, her silver hair tied back with a blue ribbon. The world outside was still gray, but inside that little shop, a warm light hummed. Her name was Nana Pearl, though everyone in town simply called her Pearl. She didn't ask questions when I pointed at the paper in the window. just looked me up and down, then handed me a towel and nodded toward the sink. I started scrubbing without thinking. By the time the floor gleamed, she'd set down a cup of coffee and a small plate of toast. That night, she showed me the attic room above the cafe. The air was thick with the scent of cinnamon and dust. A narrow bed pressed against the wall, a cracked lamp, a single window with rain stains running like old tears. Still, when I sat on that bed, it felt softer than anything I'd touched in weeks. For the first time since everything collapsed, I slept through the night. Days folded into each other. Morning coffee, dishes, wiping tables, then mopping the floor again. The rhythm didn't erase the ache, but it gave it a place to live between the broom strokes and the clinking of cups. Pearl never pried. Her kindness was wordless, offered through leftovers and clean towels. One afternoon, the espresso machine sputtered, refusing to start. Instinct made me take it apart. My hands remembered what it felt like to fix things. As I worked, a man's shadow fell across the counter. He was tall, with oil-stained sleeves and eyes that held the quiet weight of someone who understood broken things. Dmitry Novak, a maintenance technician for the nearby buildings, came by for coffee every few days. He watched me reassemble the machine, then gave a small nod that felt like approval. I didn't know it yet, but that nod would change everything. In the weeks that followed, Dmitry began leaving behind old manuals and spare bolts. "If you're going to fix things," he once said, "you should know how they breathe." His words lingered long after he left. I started spending evenings in the back room, taking apart fans, wiring lamps, watching gears spin until they made sense again. Work became language. Tools replaced words. At night, when the cafe went dark, I would stand by the attic window and look down at the quiet street. The town was small, anonymous enough for me to disappear into. Yet, I felt the faint pulse of something I hadn't dared to name hope. Then one evening, as I cleaned the counter, the bell over the cafe door chimed. A group of women entered, laughing, their voices bright. They sat near the window, scrolling through photos on a phone. I caught a glimpse of the screen, a familiar smile, a face I had once trusted. Juno. She stood in the center of the picture, glowing, surrounded by pink balloons that read, "It's a girl." My mother was beside her, cake knife in hand, proud and radiant. Behind them, Shane grinned like nothing had ever been broken. The air thickened. My chest tightened until it hurt to breathe. I turned away before the tears came, scrubbing the same spot on the counter until my knuckles whitened. They had moved on, celebrated, replaced me. That night, I went upstairs and opened the small window. The town lights flickered below, distant and cold. Somewhere between the clatter of dishes and the hum of the machines I'd fixed, I realized something fierce inside me had changed. If the world had erased me, I would learn to rebuild myself piece by piece. A full year had passed before I realized the smell of coffee no longer clung to my clothes. Boise's air had turned sharp again, the kind that carried sawdust and winter light through unfinished buildings. I had stopped being a runaway and started becoming someone else, someone who worked with tools instead of tears. Dmitry found me one afternoon balancing on a ladder, rewiring a ceiling fan. He handed me a form for night classes at the community college. "Get first," he said, "then trade certification." His belief in me felt undeserved, yet I couldn't ignore it. Every night, I studied until the letters blurred. Every morning I worked until my hands ached. Slowly, my mind started to rebuild the walls that had collapsed years ago. When the certificate finally arrived, I held it the way most people hold apologies they never got, tight, trembling, disbelieving. I applied for an apprenticeship in HVAC maintenance, and when the acceptance email came, I changed my name officially. Ria Donnelly. Not my father's name, not the family that had erased me, my own. The work was grueling: rooftops in summer, basements in winter, but each repair was a small redemption. The hum of machines became my language. I liked that metal never lied. It either worked or it didn't. People were never that simple. Months later, during a job at a downtown office, a coworker was accused of stealing a client's necklace. Panic spread fast. I saw the same fear in his eyes that once lived in mine. I checked the vents, the trash bins, the drawers, and found the necklace wedged under a cabinet leg, probably fallen during cleaning. He wept when I placed it on his palm. I didn't tell him why I understood so well. That night, I sat in my small rented room surrounded by notes and blueprints. For the first time, I didn't feel like someone trying to survive. I felt like a builder. By the second year, I saved enough to buy a used van and painted the name Donnelly Elevate Systems on its side. It wasn't much, just me, a toolbox, and 2 part-time helpers, but it was mine. Work poured in faster than I could handle. Maybe Boise had a soft spot for the quiet kind of determination. Sometimes I caught my reflection in the metal panels I fixed, and didn't recognize her. My hair shorter, my shoulders steadier. Not the girl from the police station, not the shadow of someone else's lie. Just a woman with calloused hands who fixed things for a living. I thought peace might finally be permanent, but peace, like machinery, has fragile parts. It was a Sunday when the phone rang a number I didn't know but recognized anyway. The silence on the line was thick, hesitant, then a voice I hadn't heard in almost a decade. Ria, it's me, Luca. My pulse stuttered. I said nothing, letting the hum of the fan fill the space. He took a breath, heavy and uneven. You should know, Juno's been arrested. The name felt foreign and familiar all at once, like a wound under a healed scar. He kept talking something about another accusation, another man. The same lie told all over again. I didn't speak. I didn't cry. I just stared at the blueprints on my desk, tracing the lines with my fingertip, steady and cold. Somewhere far away, the world had started breaking for someone else this time. Morning arrived with a kind of stillness that only follows chaos. The city was half awake, its skyline washed pale by winter light. I sipped burnt coffee from a paper cup while the radio hummed in the background. The words didn't sink in until I caught her name. Juno Vale. The announcer's tone was clipped, factual. Local woman arrested on charges of false reporting and fraud. My fingers tightened around the cup. I turned off the radio, but the words lingered, echoing in the silence like footsteps in an empty hall. For a moment, I imagined her face as she'd been at 17, tear-streaked, shaking, eyes wide with performance. The world had believed her once. Now it was watching her unravel. I opened my laptop. News feeds blinked with headlines, photos, old interviews. One picture showed Juno in handcuffs outside a courthouse, her hair disheveled, her expression almost bored. The comments beneath were cruel, righteous, endless. Some called her a liar, others a monster. Justice, they said. But justice didn't feel like this. I waited for relief that never came. Instead, I felt a strange hollowness, like standing in an abandoned room where an echo had nowhere left to land. I thought of the years she had stolen from me, the nights I'd whispered explanations to no one, the life I had to rebuild piece by piece. I thought of the version of me that had been buried beneath her lie. It should have felt like closure. It didn't. By noon, my inbox was full. Reporters asking for statements. Strangers digging up my past. Then one email stood out, official letterhead. Boise County Police Department. The subject line read, Reinvestigation Notice. I hesitated before opening it. Inside, a brief message. Miss Donnelly, in light of recent developments, the prior case filed under your name is being reviewed. You are officially cleared of all prior implications. Attached was a scanned document of formal exoneration, signed and sealed, 10 years too late. I printed it, stared at the signature until it blurred. My name, the one they had once erased, now stamped beneath the word innocent. The paper trembled in my hand. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just set it on my workbench beside a blueprint and watched the sunlight creep across the page. 10 years of exile for a single sheet of apology. It felt small, absurd. Later that night, I stood by the open window. The city lights pulsed faintly, steady as a heartbeat. I held the letter over a candle's flame and watched the edges curl, blacken, crumble into quiet ash. They had taken everything from me once: my home, my voice, my name. Now they were trying to return pieces of it as if redemption were a package to be mailed. But I had built a life that didn't need their permission. When the last fragment of paper turned to dust, I closed the window. The night air was cold against my face, but it carried something almost tender, the scent of clean smoke and the faint hum of engines below. For the first time, the word justice didn't sound like revenge. It sounded like peace. The road back to Boise felt smaller than I remembered, like time had folded it in on itself. Winter sunlight flashed across the windshield, slicing through the quiet inside the car. 10 years of distance sat in the passenger seat beside me, invisible but heavy. The letter from the lawyer lay on the dashboard, formal, impersonal. Estate liquidation notice. Curtis was gone. My mother was ill. The house I once called home would be sold within the month. My signature was required. I told myself it was just paperwork, nothing more, but every mile closer felt like peeling back a scar. When the city limits sign appeared, something inside me sank. Boise hadn't changed much. Same gas stations, same cracked sidewalks, but I had. The last time I drove this road, I was a ghost leaving her own life behind. Now I was someone who had learned to live without needing a past. The old neighborhood was quiet. Yards once green had gone pale, fences leaning like old men too tired to stand straight. My family's house stood at the corner, its porch light shattered, the mailbox rusted through. The windows were boarded halfway, like someone couldn't decide between leaving and staying. I parked by the curb and sat there, hands on the steering wheel, not sure if I should go in. The air smelled of pine and faint rot, the kind that only old memories carry. Inside, the floorboards complained under my steps. The walls were still the same pale blue Mom had painted years ago, though the color had faded to the shade of forgetting. The living room was empty except for a sofa skeleton and a coffee table missing one leg. Sunlight bled through the cracks in the blinds, painting thin bars across the dust. Every corner carried echoes, laughter that wasn't mine, accusations that still lived in the walls. In the kitchen, a calendar from years ago still hung crookedly. December. The last month I'd lived here. I traced the date marked with a red circle the day everything ended. My chest tightened, but the ache was quieter now, like a memory learning to whisper. Upstairs I opened what had once been my room. Empty. The wallpaper peeled like old skin. A single nail remained on the wall, where a photo used to hang me and Juno, arms around each other, smiling as if forever were real. I found the same photo later, buried under a stack of papers on Curtis's desk. My face had been cut out neatly, the edges sharp and deliberate. They had erased me even from pictures. I held that photo for a long time, not out of sadness but clarity. They had chosen their story. I had built mine. Outside, the wind picked up. I walked to the porch, laid the photo on the railing, and let the breeze take it. It lifted, spun once, and vanished into the pale afternoon sky. I stood there until the chill reached my bones. The street was silent, the air still. Somewhere, a door creaked in the distance, but it wasn't mine anymore. This house had been the beginning and the ending of everything I used to be. Now, it was neither. I turned, locked the door behind me, and didn't look back. As I started the engine, my reflection flickered in the rearview mirror, older, steadier, free. This isn't home anymore, I thought. I am. Morning light slid across my apartment floor, pale and steady, the kind that doesn't promise anything, just exists. The world outside was calm, the hum of traffic distant, the scent of brewed coffee hanging in the air. For the first time in a long while, my days had rhythm without pain. Then came the knock. It was soft at first, almost uncertain. I ignored it. Another knock followed, louder this time, familiar in its insistence. I froze. 10 years had taught me to recognize sounds I never wanted to hear again. Through the peephole, two silhouettes stood on the other side. Mom, Shane. Time didn't rewind. It didn't shatter. It just paused. I opened the door halfway, the chain still latched. Mom looked smaller than I remembered, her face hollowed by years and guilt. Shane stood slightly behind her, eyes sunken, carrying something like regret but dressed in exhaustion. No words came. None were needed. Their presence said everything. Mom's hands trembled, clutching her purse as if it were a lifeline. Her lips moved, shaping apologies that never found a voice. Tears slid down her cheeks, catching light before falling. Shane's gaze met mine once, then faltered. He nodded, a gesture too late to matter. I watched them the way you watch strangers at a train station, distant, detached, knowing their departure means nothing to you anymore. They had come searching for closure, maybe forgiveness. But forgiveness isn't a door anyone else can knock on. Behind them, the hallway was bright, almost blinding. Their shadows looked faint, insubstantial, like memories dissolving in daylight. For a heartbeat, I thought of letting them in just to prove to myself I no longer hated them. But even that would have been giving them space and a life they no longer belonged to. I unlatched the chain not to open the door wider but to close it completely. When the click echoed, it didn't sound like cruelty. It sounded like peace. I stood there leaning against the wood, listening to their muffled sobs fade into the hallway. The air inside my apartment felt lighter, clearer. The past had come knocking, and I had finally refused to answer. I poured another cup of coffee, hands steady. Outside, the city moved on traffic, laughter, the low hum of everyday survival. Life uncomplicated by ghosts. Standing by the window, I looked at the world below and thought about the strange symmetry of things. Once, they had shut a door on me without hesitation. Now, I had done the same with understanding, not anger. That difference was everything. People say closure comes from forgiveness, but they're wrong. Closure comes when you no longer need anyone else to understand your pain. The truth had cleared my name, but silence had freed my soul. They had come too late to rewrite anything. The only story left was mine. And it was already finished. Some doors deserve to stay closed. If Ria's silence spoke louder than revenge, tell her story mattered. Like, comment, and subscribe for more tales where peace is the final act of strength.